Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Gleed, Dean of NYU Wagner's Graduate School of Public Service. Welcome to the latest collaboration between NYU Wagner and the Century Foundation. Today's discussion will focus on the ramifications of misinformation and hate speech on social media and policy ideas to address these problems. Welcome to our esteemed speakers, Malkia David Cyril, Founding Director and Senior Fellow at Media Justice, Joan Donovan, who is Research Director at the Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard. And I welcome Elizabeth Dwaskin, who is the Silicon Valley correspondent at the Washington Post and who will moderate our discussion. Elizabeth?
Hi, Sherry. Thanks so much for bringing me on. Excited to do this panel and talk with these two fantastic, can I say badass women, and who I'd like to bring on, Joan and Malkia. And we can just dive in. Quick background on me, we've all been, and on all of us, is that all of us have kind of been living and breathing these issues for the last number of years, probably Malkia for the longest. My turning point was, during the Russian disinformation revelations right after the 2016 presidential election. We had been talking for a while about privacy issues and accountability. Was tech too powerful, becoming too powerful? But I think that was a turning point for the public and for a lot of us journalists to show really the potential harms for democracy that technology companies can cause. And then we welcome to the Trump era, where there's this rise of hate speech, bullying, and ugliness online worlds mixing into real world hate. Fast forward to the 2020 election, and it culminates in the January 6th Capitol riots. And so I want to talk about all of it, and I want to talk about solutions. The first question is a broad question about history. I know I told both of you I wouldn't start with the history, but I'm going to, which is, what do you think that we learned in 2020 about the harms from social media, particularly around major national events, including Stop the Steal and the death of George Floyd?
I think that some people learned in 2020 that the kind of hate and organizing of white supremacy that we see online has these real world impacts, right, of the deaths and killing of Black people. But I think that Black people knew that for a very long time. Some people didn't know that till 2020, but there's a whole group of people who knew that for a very long time. We saw it in Charlottesville. We saw it in 2000. What was that? 17. We've known. We saw. During the case of the Central Park Five, how media and how technology and how conversations about race in the public domain have deadly impacts, deadly and harmful, extraordinary harms on certain communities. So I don't know, if 2020 taught us that. I will say that it definitely amplified. We saw that misinformation about COVID-19 has, coupled with bad policy, has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in this country. And so I would say, for example, that social media companies are as liable as, for example, Donald Trump is in those deaths. They are as culpable because they did not take the steps and the action and make the interventions that they could have to correct and limit this misinformation. So what did we learn? I don't know. I just say that. I don't know if we even learned it. I'll just say that too. That's what I saw, but I don't know if we learned that in general.
Yeah. Takeaways. Joan, what are your takeaways from the events of 2020 and what it says about the platform's ability to handle?
Mac is so right here on this, which is to say that learning is not necessarily what happened. And we're like hyper consciously aware, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be things that are done about it. I want to say that, if we take the last decade of social media and we think about social media as this kind of hybrid communication system that blends print and television and radio, and what the printing press did to make more and more people authors. The internet has really made us all publishers in a big way. And, 10 years ago, we might be saying very different things about the same technology, which is that activists tend to have a first mover advantage. They tend to take anything that comes out and try to figure out how to use it to spread the message in the campaign. And we saw this with the telephone and radio. Like with the telephone, activists immediately were like, let's do phone trees. Let's figure out how to make this work for us. But over the last 10 years of social media, you see a bunch of different actors pick up the same technology and figure out how to use it to incredibly horrific ends. And if you consider something like the Unite the Right rally a beta test for something like Stop the Steal, what you have to look at over time is the progression of those networks, how they build on each other, how every event becomes another way for them to get more densely integrated. And so 2020, the moment that we saw conspiracists put aside their petty grievances with white supremacists, put aside their grievances with militias, put aside their grievances with anti-vaxxers, and they all come together in this really broad coalition. And then that coalition is animated by people like Giuliani and Bannon and Trump and Roger Stone and the Proud Boys to call for this massive event at the Capitol. What we should have learned early on was that the power of these platforms to bring people together to coordinate action is immense, but at the same time, it's not always going to be used for pro-social causes. And what it means then is that the groups of people, and Cornell Williams Brooks last night was saying 27 million people came out to rally in support of George Floyd. 27 million people, right? And that scale is a result of social media. At the same time, it was also the same thing that delivered tens of thousands of people into the Stop the Steal movement. And so the question then becomes, how do you allow for the good and the righteous possibilities of technology at the same time that you do not allow these adversarial movements to gain traction and to grow in the way they did?
Yeah, so that's the heart of the issue. So I want to dive right into that. Okay, so Stop the Steal. At what point, because in some ways that looks like political organizing, and yet political organizing that has flourished on the platforms for the good, for democracy. At what point should Facebook have, because it was, the mass movement was organized on Twitter, Telegram, it was a lot of platforms, but the mass movement certainly was organized on Facebook as well. So ask Facebook, at what point should they have said, okay, this isn't typical political organizing? Is it the very moment that they banned the first Stop the Steal group and then made the decision that still perplexes me to allow all the rest of them after banning a big one the day after the election? Is it because of the people involved, as you mentioned, Joan, to say these are already people that have a history of breaking our rules that we've kicked off the platforms, now they're involved? But what are the moments? What were the red flags that were missed? Because there is this question, and I want to get into it too with you, Malkia, which is like, yeah, that line between authentic activism, which has flourished on the platforms and should be allowed, and when it pops into disinformation, perversion of democracy, especially when these are all domestic issues. I think I talked to a Facebook executive yesterday who said that all of this makes Russian disinformation look like child's play.
Well, let me say that you don't get here without the Russia stuff happening first, which is to say that Russia impersonates U.S. social movements in order to gin up all kinds of cacophony in order to essentially what you have is a group trying to own both sides of a narrative. And we have a couple of case studies on mediamanipulation.org essentially around how the US far right has impersonated Black Lives Matter and Antifa in order to really control the narrative on social media, which is to say that there is an obvious vulnerability on social media related to impersonation and defaming different movements and targeting certain movements. And we know that race is such a huge wedge issue in the United States that when anything comes up in breaking news related to race, we're going to have these operatives jump in.
And the
So,
Russians
which
do
is to
that
say,
very well.
yeah, the Russians do it, but also our guy Steve Bannon does it better than anybody else. And that's why, when Facebook saw what was happening and they saw who was involved and they saw that it had people from Proud Boys and other groups that they had already suspended, they should have kept up with it, but they should have really modeled their policies on anti-Black and anti-Semitic movements. If they had really taken it seriously from the beginning instead of trying to get into the muck and the mire of what they consider authentic behavior versus inauthentic behavior, if they had just taken the racism seriously, that there were racists using the platform in a very particular kind of way, you wouldn't have seen Stop the Steal be able to manifest as quickly as it did, because it was on the backs of a bunch of people who they hadn't deleted the individual accounts of these people, but they had deleted groups and other events that these folks had been part of. And so, but you don't get any of this to scale without the platform companies. What they built is a machine that allows messaging to scale, but also allows for rapid coordination of groups in public. And that when it's used in this way is it's destructive to democracy and to public health. But I'd love to get Mac's opinion as well.
I mean, I think authenticity is one question and an important one, but I don't think it's the only issue. I think you can have very authentic white supremacists, you know what I mean, who are organizing on the platforms. It's authentic political organizing, but I think that, so equating authentic political organizing on the right and authentic political organizing on the left is not a valid equation. You know what I'm saying? They're not equal. And I'm not actually talking about the right and the left. I'm talking about white supremacists and men's rights groups and disinformation groups that want to limit the rights and power of other folks. And then we're talking about organizations and individuals, within BIPOC communities and queer and trans communities and whatever, that are actually seeking to expand rights and justice for everybody. So that to me is the actual difference, not authentic versus inauthentic, although I do think obviously when dealing with disinformation, that's critical, but also what is the purpose of the organizing, I think also matters. I also think that, let's look at the stats, let's look at the facts. 1 in 4 Black, social media users report being harassed and threatened online, not disagreements, being harassed and threatened. And a lot of times that harassment and those threats, as we saw recently with Patrisse Cullors, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, those things roll off of social media and threaten people in real life. I've watched my friends have to get increased security, at their homes, traveling with them. So this is not an issue of whether or not, this is not an issue of whether or not the white right is inauthentic. The issue for me is whether the white right should have the power to organize and radicalize on social media. And that to me is a question that becomes very difficult to answer in a racist society. It's, the conversation is always going to move back into the question of free speech versus hate speech. Is this really censorship? The right, are conservatives being censored? That becomes the conversation. But I don't actually think that's what's real.
Well, thank you for that. It's rather than, first of all, for the platforms, what I'm taking from you saying that is rather than seeing it through this lens of, is it authentic or inauthentic? And if it's inauthentic, it's Russia, it's foreign powers, it's bad. And if it's authentic, we have to assume it's good. And then, it becomes free speech versus harms. But you're saying, let's look at this through a lens of who are the actors, the history of racism, the association with hate groups. If you look at it through that lens, it's really about the behavior is authentic, but do we want it from the perspective of our values?
Exactly. We have to place it in context, and that's one of the big problems, is that algorithms and some of these corporate decisions, they don't place the stuff in context, or rather the context that it's in is a racist context. so I think we need to address that.
Let's I want to talk a little bit about free. You talked about how there needs to be a rethinking of these debates between free speech and harm. Is that what you're talking about? That in the last few years, it's always been this discussion within the social media companies and in our politics of how much free speech do we allow versus its harms. But you think there should be a reframing of that. Tell me about that.
I mean, I think a few things. I think number one, we saw that when let me go back. Let me say that my first meeting with Facebook was in 2014. And this is before any of the media and technology groups took up the issue of social media bias or social media discrimination, or any of the algorithmic decision making at social media companies, because I wasn't there as the director of Center for Media Justice. I was there as a member of Black Lives Matter. And that was a conversation that I organized through my engagement there. So I just want to say, first of all, that this is a conversation that has been going on for a very long time, even before that, in the 2009, 2010, when Twitter had played its role in the Arab Spring, and, and Facebook was becoming a place organized, to organize around Occupy. We had, we raised issues then, right? So I just want to say, first of all, this is not a new conversation by any means. I think that's important.
Platforms enabling hate, the platforms
Absolutely.
enabling bullying and harassment. I know something we both have been talking about for a long time, and even well before Donald Trump.
That's right.
The movement that he galvanized.
But even more important than that for me is that at that time we thought that these platforms were going to be a tool for democratization. We thought that these platforms were going to be a tool to expand speech. What we didn't, and we were concerned though about the dynamics of power. We were concerned that the only way these platforms could do that is if you have a public interest media surrounding it, as if you have a public interest internet surrounding it. Without that, without like data privacy laws, without real broadband access, what you have is you have people of color, for the most part, people with incomes under $50,000, people in rural communities forced into a single access point of social media. That's where we get most of our news. That's where we get most of our expression. Our content creators are pushed through social media, and we're denied access to the rest of the internet. So you end up with platforms that have so much power, that are mediating democracy and mediating speech. And in that context, and in a broader, context of U.S. speech, we already know that through our education system and through our media, and now through these platforms, Black speech is already curtailed, extraordinarily curtailed. And when you force people through this little access point, once again, you shrink it even further. Well, so we can't talk about free speech versus hate speech when we already know the free speech of all of these people is so narrowed by the conditions.
Right. It shouldn't be this question of what should Facebook have allowed or not. It's just, why did Facebook or the others have so much power over what is allowed? So I want to go into that open internet and talk about solutions. Also want to plug everyone, in 10 minutes, we're going to open this up to questions, which are always the best. So please submit them. Yesterday, Joan testified in Congress at the Senate Judiciary, and it was your answers were the best and hilarious oftentimes, because the senators were trying to corner you into, get you to say things that, trying to peg the speakers in lies, or I'm not quite sure. It was that tenor. And but you must be very fired up, and I'm curious. the impressions you got from that hearing. This is the third, I think, hearing this year in the Biden administration on the tech industry. Every time I've heard one of those, the regulators are like, we are ready to regulate. We're ready to rein in big tech. So I want to hear whether you came away with the impression that that's possible and doable. And I also want to ask both of you, before the hearing, you were asking people to tag the hashtag, the open internet hashtag.
Yeah, the public interest
internet hashtag.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
what does that mean?
Yeah, well, let me start with my candor about testifying in front of the Senate, which is like, they asked me. I think I got the okay on. I heard from Politico before I heard from the Senate that I was going to be asked. So it was a really weird situation to be in. That those reporters, they're very, very thorough. Which is to say that I think I was added because they needed someone that does research about the internet and could counter some of the PR of the companies. And I think that by and large across government, everybody's sort of sick of the PR line that, we don't know what's happening here. We just keep making technology and people keep using it, and not that we can't be blamed. And as we watch this kind of revolving door of people coming out of government, going into these platform companies, and then coming back into government, we have to be really wary of the fact that we have an industry not only consolidating power in communication space, but also consolidating power in government. So that wasn't lost on me, that I was asked last and not asked as many questions as other folks were. But the question of, is government ready for regulating tech? I am very skeptical at this stage that we're going to get any regulation at all, because of the way in which this industry and politicians tend to be working hand in glove, in an unfortunate scenario where, when it comes to disinformation, by and large, the professional group benefiting the most from it are politicians. And so what do you do with that when the technology companies, only short of having their advertisers pull out revenue, are not willing to do much? They're not moral companies. You can tell them that the things they're doing are aiding and abetting racists, and they'll say, well, they have a right to speak too. And you're just like, well, what? Like, I just almost, it's just, I always have a WTF moment when that comes up. But they're not moral. And then when it comes to asking government to regulate them, you're asking government to know exactly how these systems work, which is shrouded in mystery. Frank Pasquale's book, The Black Box Society, still remains one of the most important context setters for understanding how closed off these products are from oversight and from auditing. And I know that Malkia and Media Justice have been for years trying to do civil rights audits of these platforms. But the other piece of it that I think is what I got out of the hearing, essentially, is that we don't have a great sense of what it would mean to build an internet for the people. Social media is a product built on top of the internet. The internet still exists. There are still many wonderful innovations waiting to happen, but we've got a problem of consolidation. It's rooting itself in government. And if we want to get at innovation, if we want to move forward, we actually have to descale these companies. We actually have to make them a lot smaller.
So break up Facebook from WhatsApp.
At least break up some pieces of these companies so that you don't have so much consolidation throughout the tech stack. And I'm not just talking about the features where you'd say, oh, WhatsApp over here and Instagram over here. I'm talking about, if you're in data collection and harvesting and you're in advertising, you can price fix really easy. There's nobody that's going to be there to be able to say, oh, this kind of information, when you target market people with financial services, housing, and jobs, and you create those targeted divisions in those buckets, That's not that's not good for our civil rights. But there's nobody there auditing it. But if you take a look, not just at the actual companies, but through the entire tech stack, all the way from internet service provider up through the hardware, up through the content delivery, content creation, no company should be in every layer of the tech stack, because then that gives them enormous power. We're very lucky, for instance, that Apple is not also in social media and in the App Store. That's not going to hold forever. And so when I say a public interest internet, what I really mean,
or that Facebook is not in devices and having the apps on those devices, though they've all tried to be in devices.
And selling the advertising and harvesting the data and requiring you to give data to them in order to use their advertising services. It's a misnomer that Facebook sells data. What they really do is try to get you to give them more data. And so they have just massive, like, tranches of data on people that when it leaks, and we saw this, I think, last week, over 500 million people's information has been leaked. But when it leaks, it's a serious problem for identity theft. And, and so at the end of the day, these companies require oversight. And we need to get towards a tech industry that serves the people rather than these few companies. And if you start to think from that, like, really big perspective, rather than, well, like, what can we fine tune on Facebook or Twitter to make them more hospitable to democracies, then you get to the bottom of the issue, which is we're not done with foreign interference and bad actors figuring out how to use apps to mobilize people towards very violent ends. And so I'm not just concerned about the big companies. I'm also concerned about spaces and places like Gab and Parler, where you can really do maximum damage if you get the right kind of media and environment together to get people to coordinate quickly.
So I'm gonna jump in and say two things about that. One is we do have competition. The thing about breaking, the argument, breaking up the tech companies and that'll, the competition itself is going to make the system better. I don't believe that at all. I think when there's been competition, data is very profitable, and there's been a total race to the bottom around data. So around harvesting data, that's what we saw when there was more competition, and we actually see that now just with the competition among the tech giants. But also, there is, as much as companies like Facebook have done and Google have done a lot to squelch innovation, we also know that there are platforms like Discord and Gab and Telegram. There are actually a plethora of platforms. So I kind of want to push back on both of you saying that this public interest internet idea, which is we want, diversity and multiple organizations and companies at every level of the stack. But I would say there actually are, and it hasn't made the system better. There's not enough. There's massive consolidation. There's not enough. But from what there is, has it made the system better?
Well, but let me just share that, look, in 1996, when, the government was pushed to address the issue of cross ownership, address the issue of consolidation, there was a whole Telecommunications Act that attempted to address this issue. It was only in the repeal of various parts of that act that led to the consolidation of the telecom industry, that led then to the creation of the allowance for a big tech industry in this way. Okay. So there are regulations, and the thing is, it's not one. Cross ownership, which was important for the cable industry, is equally important for big tech and social platforms.
Explain what cross ownership is. Explain what that is.
Bills that prevent, for example, television station. Bills that prevent, like, folks from owning broadcast and print at the same time. And from owning, like, across different types of media. So broadcast companies, owning, but also limiting the number of companies and stuff you can own, number of properties, I guess you would say, you can own, the number of radio stations, the number of television stations. So the point is that, without getting into great detail, because I know we're out of time here, but I just want to be clear that it's not about just breaking up the companies and making them smaller. It is about interfering with their monopoly. Okay, it's about interfering with their ability to monopolize. It's also about creating data privacy laws. See, the cross ownership rules don't work unless there are also strong data privacy rules, which also don't work unless there are also real access points, for people to engage in the entire internet. So the thing is, it's not one law that will work. We need an entire telecom act that is built for the 21st century, that is built for the digital age, that is going to create the kind of internet that we deserve in this time.
Thank you, Joan. I don't know if you want to give a quick answer, but I want to jump into questions, and we're in that time. So I could, if you want to give a super quick answer.
I just have a little bit to say about that, which is to say that I don't necessarily know if more businesses are really what I'm saying. What I'm saying, moreover, is that I want to have, exactly as Mac is saying, that we need to really think from the ground up, what is the internet that we want and how can it be delivered to the people free and open, as we had said. But the one thing that Mac said earlier is also key here, which is that we also need to have public interest media driving much of the conversations around what counts as content, because for right now, what you have is a serious advantage given to media manipulators, disinformers, because they have the tools of broadcast and none of the rules, or even let's say there's no rules of journalism, but even the ethics and the norms. And so I can spin up a wapo.info and make a profile that says I'm Lisa Dwaskin and here's my headline of the day. And it's really on you to try to figure out if that's real or not. And until such time that we have not just ethics, but commitments and penalties in some cases for that type of impersonation and lies, then we're gonna kind of keep living in this twilight zone. And the last thing I'll say about that is the internet itself is built on hoaxes and shenanigans. I mean, it's really like even the way that it came together and how it's been developed when it comes to organizations and whatnot, it really makes things look a lot more bigger and organized than they are. And it does that through mimicry, which is to say that templates and the way in which things circulate online tend to be really hoaxable in this moment. And so we want to guard against that just for our own cognitive security.
All right, let's jump into questions. But yeah, I think what I'm taking away from what both of you are saying is that, one, more punishment. Clearly, punishment makes people change. It's the stick. There have been no sticks for the fundamental problems the internet enables, even impersonation and hoaxes. There's no punishment, and that the internet itself should be. I think what Malkia is saying is there needs to be an overarching framework to govern the internet, to govern it from the ground up, to prevent this kind of consolidation and chokeholds. I'm going to jump into a question, which is there any possible way for social media companies to change the business model so that it is profitable to prevent misinformation from spreading? And let's try to give a 1 minute answer so we can get to more questions.
Yeah, you can change the business model, but it requires you, of course, to reduce the scale, which is to say that, I've been a proponent of this idea of like strategic amplification for years, which is to say that things that are going viral that seem to be out of proportion to the attention, to the audience, are some things that should trigger review very quickly, because it tends to be inciting content, hateful content, harassing content, or just completely outrageous things that go quote unquote viral. And that process of manipulating algorithms and faking engagement, because the business model at these companies are predicated on growth and ad revenue, they have no desire to interfere and disrupt misinformation reaching scale. They actually profit from it. And so we do have to maybe make a few less billion every year in order to counter this with putting humans in the loop. But I do think that the only way that we're going to solve for this is going to require curation and moderation.
And let me just say that, look, you can't make it not profitable. Let me just be straightforward. It is profitable. Antagonism is profitable. What you can do is create so many penalties for violations that that supporting misinformation becomes not profitable. You know what I mean? Like, that's the only way you deal with it. Because look, in this pandemic, the only industry that has grown, the industry that has grown tenfold is the tech industry. While everyone else is losing, people losing their jobs, people losing their homes, billionaires are still being created out of Silicon Valley. So, no, we can't make it not profitable, but we can mess with the profits, and make it undesirable.
Does that mean something like false story about Liz Dwaskin? Okay, a hoax, false page goes viral, and I get to sue them as a result?
I don't know if it's only
Evolution
about,
of
I think
defamation
Joan
laws?
can probably speak better to it. I don't know that it's about individual lawsuits. I think the FTC needs to leverage penalties. I think government penalties need to be leveraged when these companies violate en masse civil rights, when they violate en masse basic democratic principles. Then the government needs to leverage penalties straight up.
A lot of people are
that's
asking
how they've done it in other countries when it comes to spreading hate content, is that there's fines to pay, which incentivizes generating technology and hiring people to stop that from happening.
Yeah, for hate, not for misinformation. So
it's coming.
Okay, we should go into it. I want to get into someone's question where a number of questions have been around personal responsibility, like what can we, people in the audience, do to address this problem? Like what's the people's power in this? Because we've talked a lot about creating punishments for the tech companies from the government, creating a new system. That's all government. What can the people do?
I think, like, if we, the title of this panel has a lot to do with hate speech. And I think when it comes to seeing hate online, one of the things that I struggle with, of course, is the amplification of hate. And one of the things that I've, told journalists over the years is that getting both sides of a story when it comes to just calling up a white supremacist is not necessary. That their views are out there and they're everywhere. Right now, I've seen some really successful campaigns around deplatforming and demonetizing hate groups online. And I think that we, especially the media justice has been part of the Stop Hate for Profit coalition. So I think supporting efforts like that are really important. The other thing that I think people
say what
should
the Stop Hate for Profit coalition is.
It's a pretty big coalition full of lots of great media advocacy organizations. I think also ADL and Free Press are part of it. And the idea is essentially that, and Color of Change as well, what they did was they got advertisers to sign on to say that if our ads are being served alongside hate content, that we are no longer going to do advertising with these companies. And that has definitely changed the way that YouTube works. They have really changed exactly how they serve advertising to stop this from happening. And I think that those kind of campaigns, it's not about like individuals staying up all night trying to flag every neo-Nazi you see. I think it's really about applying organized public pressure and organized coordinated pressure and to ensure that people see that these campaigns are out there, like Stop Hate for Profit, or Color of Change also ran a blood money campaign, which was trying to get PayPal and other payment servicers to stop servicing hateful organizations. But I think that there are a bunch of ways and a bunch of different organizations that people could get involved with in order to start to get at the fundamental causes of why hate scales so quickly across these platforms.
Makia, what do you think?
You know, I feel like Joan spoke to it, but I'll just say this, that I actually don't think that there are very many mechanisms for individuals to take action. That was the original question, right? What can the people do? And individual people, you can report what you see, but reporting, in my experience, hasn't led to much change. And even the reporting mechanisms are very poor. They're very poorly designed. They, anyway, the appeal mechanisms are poorly designed. So in terms of individual action, I think the point is, we should not focus on individual action. We should focus on collective action. We should encourage folks to support campaigns and organizations that are, in fact, challenging these conditions. We talked about the organization, the coalition that Joan just mentioned, and then there's Change the Terms, and there's a bunch of different campaigns and fights that are actively happening right now that folks could support with their dollars, that folks could support, with their time and energy. I think also, demanding of companies directly, of CEOs of companies, that they take action, based on the demands that these organizations and coalitions have rendered. I think, so that's some of what I think individuals can do. When it comes time to lobby your congressperson, your local politicians, to pressure them to support these federal bills, around data privacy and around broadband access and around, leveraging penalties on these companies, they should do that. They should meet with their members of Congress. They should. So that's the kind of stuff. But see, the thing I want to say here is that when people ask that question, what they're often asking is, what easy thing can I do? What thing can I do from sitting in my living room? What button can I click to make this change? And I'm trying to say that you cannot do. It's not that is not what you can do. So if you want to do something and you think this is a real problem, you're gonna have to leave the house.
That's the hardest part about the advocacy space here, is that technology companies want you to believe that they can turn some dials and would change something, but it's really it's really a political and a social problem at its core, and the technology is something that is a consequence of it, which is to say that as long as the technology allows for these kinds of behaviors, they're going to especially when it comes to white supremacists, they're going to adapt. And so so being organized and being part of organized coalitions and supporting in other ways is always going to be helpful. I could also add here too that raising up critical journalism in this moment, that journalism that does not capitulate to the company line, journalism that really tries to investigate these problems and get at them so that everyone around you understands the stakes of this public issue, I think is really important. And I know that on the left anyway, there's a whole like spiel about clicktivism and slacktivism, and sharing articles isn't enough. Of course, sharing articles isn't enough, but it's also really crucial that we do public education. We educate each other. We make sure people are reading and understanding things, and not just like with like a hand wave being like, oh, QAnon, yeah, that thing with the Satanists and the Democrats. No, QAnon is like a thoroughly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And if you understand it for what it is, then there are different possibilities and different actions that we can ask our politicians to take, as well as pressure that can be applied to these tech companies. But that's a big plug for Liz's journalism.
Last question. I can't help myself, but give me a 30-second answer because we got to end. But which is, it's something I'm trying to work on right now. Where does this movement go? QAnon, whatever you want to call it. Where does this movement go post-Trump presidency? Considering that we're at this moment where we didn't even talk about it, but the Facebook Oversight Board, Trump's not on social media anymore, but very soon there may be a decision that allows him back. where does this movement go? Really quick, because we got to end.
I mean, it's already here. It only becomes bigger, more violent, more vitriolic the longer we refuse to deal with it as something that is authentic and real and motivated by racism, especially, when you see the dog whistles out there, like all of the stuff we're seeing about women in sports. Come on. We know nobody cared about women in sports way before this. What they want to do is gin up a lot of outrage and transphobia in order to mobilize their audiences. You have to think about media and its mobilizing capacities here. And that's why things like Tucker Carlson bringing up the great replacement theory and then doing a whole like, well, why is that a problem? It's a huge problem because it's racist. And so, unfortunately, I think it's here to stay, but we have to keep connecting the threads, educating each other, being present in the moment, and then lifting up critical voices and being aware of the risks that other folks are taking on, like Malkia takes on every day by speaking about these issues in public.
I'll just co-sign everything that Joan just said, and also say it's time for a big tech act. For the 21st century, we need big federal rules. We need state to state and federal broadband privacy laws. We need penalties from the FTC, and we need all of this, whether or not Donald Trump returns to the internet. He is not the barometer. There was hate speech before him. There's hate speech while he's been off, and there'll be hate speech if he comes back on. And so, and we need to really understand. And I think public interest journalism really needs to lift up these stories of people that have been harassed to extraordinary detriment. To like the point where we need to talk about the security impacts, the real life impacts of this level of harassment. Because it's not hate speech, it's harassment. I just want to actually just say that really clearly, right? Hate speech versus free speech, that's a theoretical conversation. Great, cool, esoteric. But I want to make sure that people understand that this is harassment and harm directed. And actually, in other contexts, it would be illegal, it would be illegal. So I think that's kind of where we need to go. We need stories about it. We need federal and state laws to prevent it. We need a whole new legal framework for algorithmic decision making. All of this is where this movement goes, and it's where it's been going. There's no change in that momentum, in that direction.
Ooh, I could talk about 30,000 more things with both of you to go off of that, but we are, and I hope we will have the conversations. But thank you so much. Thank you to NYU and to the Century Foundation for doing this and having us. Yeah, and that's a wrap. I think we're all here for questions in the future.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great to see you.
On the internet.